Hey friends, David Schimmel here. In a previous video, I showed you how to make basic EDM drum loops, and today we're going to take those loops and turn them into full-blown drops by gradually increasing the complexity and intensity of the instrumentation while also knowing when to pull back at key moments. So let's get into it. For our first example, I've created a trance loop at 138 beats per minute. That sounds like this. You typically don't want to start your drop off with all of your elements playing at maximum intensity and complexity because then you have nowhere to go from there. You usually want to start with just a small number of elements, like the kick and the bass. So we'll do that. We're going to make a 32 bar segment here. So I'll start by copying my drums to the beginning and deleting everything except the kick. I'll bring in the bass as well, and I'm going to drastically simplify it to just an eighth note and 2/16 for each beat. So that sounds like this. I also have the bass sidechain to the kick drum in pre-FX mode so that if we add effects on the kick drum, it won't interfere with the sidechaining. And this will help create a rhythmic pumping sound in the bass that sounds really good, and it helps clean up our mix by making sure the kick and the bass don't play on top of each other. So together that sounds like this. Pretty simple. So next let's introduce the snare. So duplicate the drums and the bass. Add a snare on the 2 and the 4 as is customary. Now we get this. Keep going, we'll add in open hat on every other eighth note. And we'll also make the bass line a little more active by changing that first eighth note to 2/16. Get this. And finally, for our last group of 4 measures for the first half of our longer segment, we'll add in a couple closed hi-hat notes. Just 2/16 at the beginning of each beat. Make the second one slightly quieter for dynamics. And then we'll keep our bass line the same. That gives us this. Now, we could just keep going up and up by adding more drums on top of what we already have, but here at the halfway point, this is a good time to pull back a little bit to create a gap so that the listener has the sense of anticipation and they'll want things to fill back in. So the classic way of doing that is to get rid of the kick drum. And we could do that by going into our loop, selecting our kick drum notes and pressing 0 to disable them. But because we have the side chaining set up, it's going to change the tone of our bass in a way that might interrupt the flow that we've established so far. So here's what that sounds like. I don't really care for that machine gun sound. So instead of disabling the kick drum notes, what we can do is just mute them by adding a utility onto just the kick drum in the drum rack, and then automating the gain so that the kick drum doesn't make any sound for the last 2 measures of our 4-bar phrase here. So we'll automate the gain like so. Now you'll hear the difference. The bass continues to have its rhythmic pumping sound to it. You can hear like that you want that kick drum to come back in. So let's keep going with the second half of our 32 bars here. We'll introduce a new layer onto every other snare hit to add more power. We've got this kind of tail sound. So duplicate your drums. Press A to switch to automation mode and delete the utility automation here because we want the kick drum to be playing. And we'll draw in that tail. And since this is the beginning of the second half, let's add a crash cymbal to start it off to kind of emphasize that downbeat in the listener's mind. And then for the bass, we'll start adding in some of those higher frequency notes to grab the listener's attention a bit. So delete all these, and don't forget to fill in the gaps that were left behind. We can actually pull back here a little bit too by, instead of just making it consistent 16th notes, make some of them 8th notes to fill in the gap. All right, and together that sounds like this. All right, now we've got another 16th note we can add here on the closed hat, so delete the cymbal, add that extra 16th note, and duplicate the bass line. Now we got this. All right, and now we'll bring in our last drum element, the toms, which are a low percussive sound that sits in between the kick and the snare. So we'll duplicate our final rhythm. And for our bass line, we'll also start adding in another note in the middle. Let's say this D here. So delete these, fill the gaps back in. That sounds like this. All right, and to really take things home, we'll reuse our trick of decreasing the volume of the kick drum, but we'll do it for 4 measures this time, since we did it for 2 last time, and this kind of expands that motif and makes it even more powerful in the listener's mind. So press A to enable automation, and then bring the kick to 0 for those last 4 measures. Now we get this. And of course we can add a crash cymbal on that last hit to bring things to conclusion. And one final element we'll add to heighten that rising sense of anticipation is a noise riser. So we'll grab one from our library here, put it on the last 4 measures. It's originally at 150 beats per minute, so select the clip, enable warp mode, change the BPM to 150. And then you'll notice it still doesn't cover our full 4 measures, so select the clip, press R to reverse it, then select all 4 measures, press Ctrl J to consolidate the clip, press R one more time to reverse it. And we can bring down the volume here a little bit so we get this. All right, so let's turn on our mastering chain and hear the whole thing all together. For our second example, I've made a trap loop at 150 beats per minute. That sounds like this. Again, we'll make a 32 bar segment, and this time we'll start with the kick, bass, and snare. So copy the 808, bring this note in line with the others, copy the drums, delete everything that's not the kick and the snare, and we also don't want to use our alternative snare just yet. And that sounds like this. Instead of using a compressor to sidechain the bass to the kick, I've faded in the 808 sample a little bit at the beginning so that its initial transient doesn't overlap with the kick. Alright, let's keep going with some 8th note hi-hats. Let's draw those in. Bring down the second one for dynamics. And we'll create a turnaround at the end of the 2nd and 4th measures by adding in some 16th notes. That sounds like this. All right, now we'll introduce a clap on every quarter note for the next section. And we'll also add an open hat at the end of the 1st and 3rd measures, again for accent, and make sure the open and closed hats don't play at the same time. So now we get this. For our final segment, we'll speed the closed hats up even more by making them 16th notes. And we'll also make our turnaround to be 32nd notes. So that sounds like this. And in the last example, we muted the kick drum to create that sense of anticipation right before the second half of our longer segment. But this time we use a different technique where we filter out the low and high frequencies from the drums and the 808. So select the drum and 808 tracks, press Ctrl G to group them, then add an auto filter on the group. It's in low pass mode, which is what we want. So bring down the cutoff frequency until it gets rid of most of the highs from the hi-hat and snare. Add another auto filter, switch it to high pass mode, and bring down the cutoff until it only removes the lower frequencies from the 808 and the kick. We only want these filters to turn on for the last 2 measures of the segment. So select both filters, group them together, right-click on the power button for the effect rack, select Show Automation, and make sure the effect rack is only turned on for the last 2 measures. That sounds like this. And one more thing we can do to enhance this anticipation is we'll get rid of the drums and 808 after this snare. So delete here, shorten the last 808 note. Okay, together that sounds like this. All right, let's keep going. We'll bring in the 808 now with the higher note there at the end. And we'll start with the 8th note hats segment. Actually, we'll grab this one. And this time we'll use our alternative snare that has a bit more atmosphere for the 1st and 3rd snare hits to create some contrast. We also don't need the claps, get rid of those. And make sure to add a crash cymbal at the beginning of the segment for emphasis. And together, that sounds like this. Okay, now we'll bring in the 16th note version of that. Duplicate and make sure to fill out the rest here. Don't want the claps just yet. Bring that up, bring that up. All right, we get this. And we can also add a turnaround in the 808 to create more interest. So we're going to add an 8th note here at the end on the note A, and then one on the note D sharp. And don't forget to add some extra kick drum hits to complement those 808s. So boom. That gives us this sound. All right, almost home. Bring in our last drum loop that's got the claps and the chants in it, and bring in our 808. And as before, we'll add in a riser for our last 4 measures of the beat. It's already at 150 beats per minute, so we don't need to warp it. And let's also add in a kick roll at the end to really bring us home. So 3/16 notes here. Make the same change on the 808. And we'll also add a cymbal hit and one last 808 note at the end. Just 808, cymbal hit and kick. And all right, let's turn on our limiter and hear how the whole thing sounds. So now you understand some of the fundamental ideas for turning simple loops into complete songs and establishing a sense of flow in your tracks. If you've enjoyed our time here together, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you here next time. Happy producing!